In Carry On Darkly.
Oh, cheeky.
Oh, stop messing about. Let's have more drink.
Oh, no, come on, let's go for a walk. There's a smashing front here.
There's a smashing one there, and all.
The Carry On films are a phenomenon of British comedy. Their saucy seaside humour reflects a national obsession with sexual innuendo, female anatomy and bodily functions. The humour may have been coarse and the performances little more than caricatures, but despite these shortcomings, the Carry Ons are amongst the most popular films in the history of British cinema.
See, the Carry On movies were like the dirty postcards brought to life.
By 1970, the lives of the four main Carry On stars were in disarray. Frankie Howerd was tormented by insecurities. Sid James was a serial womanizer. Charles Hawtrey was a drunk. Kenneth Williams was suicidal. Each turned to their friend and co-star Hattie Jakes for support.
Who would have thought a towel would have made all that much difference? Oh.
Well, Hattie Jakes, by all accounts, was a very down-to-earth, very lovely woman and very motherly towards people like Kenneth and Charles Hawtrey in particular. And I think that attracted Kenneth because, obviously, with having had a bad time with his father, Louis, his mother, was the great light in his life. And I think he turned to Hattie and Joan Sims and Barbara Windsor for similar sort of comfort.
Hattie Jakes was, without doubt, the most loved of the Carry On actors. Everybody adored Hattie Jakes. She looked after all the Carry On cast. She kept everybody in line. She kept morale high. Away from the film set, when things like Christmases and birthdays came round, she always remembered them.
She was somebody that you could go to and sit down and talk about your problems. Even Kenneth Williams, who was introverted to an extreme over his personal situations, he would always spend whatever Christmas he could over at Hattie Jakes's.
If Hattie was comforter to Hawtrey and Williams, then she was Sid James' confessor.
Hattie Jakes was a long-standing friend. They'd known each other for a long time from the Hancock days. And then when her husband, at that time, John de Maizière, moved into the Hancock's half-hour series, they became closer. And it was in many ways, Hattie was part of Sid's conscience. He was always been nagging him about his womanising, about his gambling, about his friendly con tricks to earn himself extra money.
Because of her size, Hattie's talents as a serious actress were overlooked. Characterised as the fat lady, she was always in a supporting role.
Hattie Jakes, I think, was very conscious of the fat jokes. They made her career. I mean, Tony Hancock did it, the Carry Ons did it, and Eric Sykes did it, and she made a great living out of these fat jokes. But I think they made Hattie very insecure as well in terms of the way. She would have been liked to have been looked at as a woman, not a fat woman.
She's a fantastically sexy woman. For a big chick, she's hot to trot. She's got those lovely little hands and very delicate and precise. And she's also got great authority.
She was never the object of ridicule. You were always invited to laugh with her rather than at her. Peter Rogers said in his obituary tribute to Hattie Jakes, she was a very large lady, but not in size, but in heart.
If Hattie was the Carry On mum, then Barbara Windsor was the comic version of a sexy, bubbly blonde. It was inevitable that Sid James would pursue the Carry On sex symbol until she gave in.
Barbara Windsor brought that sort of bawdiness with her that the shows needed. She was the counterpoint to Hattie Jakes, who was respectability with a burning desire deep inside. Barbara was all out front, literally, in so many films. I mean, everything you ever heard about Barbara is the thing to do with her bosom.
The first pair of bosoms I saw on a big cinema screen belonged to Barbara Windsor. That's true of every bloke who's about my age, late 30s, early 40s. The first boobies we looked at were Barbara's.
And flee!
Barbara Windsor was the metaphor for sex. Everybody sort of agreed that Barbara Windsor was tremendously glamorous, which I think, with no disrespect to her, a bit sort of debatable. She was postcard glamour.
You know, OK, there's that element, yes, you're laughing at women's bodies, yes, you're laughing at sexual stereotypes. Yeah, because that's what comedy is. It's sexual stereotypes. And if you do it with a bit of wit and a bit of flair, and you do it with great character actors like Kenneth Williams and Charles Hawtrey, you're onto a winner that will live forever.
Oh, Sadie, just a minute.
Vic, you're in the bathroom.
Oh, God, blimey, get back inside, quick.
Sid James pursued Barbara Windsor relentlessly. Both were married, but Sid continued to harass his co-star until they eventually had an affair. It was a relationship with a fateful outcome.
Barbara Windsor had appeared in several Carry On films towards the end of the 60s. Sid had noticed her as an actress, but not as a person. He suddenly became aware of this very bubbly, very attractive, boisterous, happy blonde. Instantly fell in love, in Sid's own words, again, in his way. The chase was on again. He had to have, in every sense, Barbara Windsor. Several people have said that if Sid hadn't been married, if Barbara hadn't been married, it might have been the real thing for Sid and Barbara.
At that time, Barbara was married to gangster Ronnie Knight, who was a friend of the Krays and had introduced Barbara to London's underworld.
Ronnie Knight was in and out of prison. One of the times when he was out of prison, word got to Ronnie that Sid was chasing Barbara. Sid and Val went off for an evening's entertainment. When they returned to their Ivor house, they discovered there'd been a break-in and the house had been rearranged. Nothing was broken, nothing was stolen, but the message was there to Sid to keep away from Barbara. So Ronnie knew what was going on, and that was his shot across the bows, if you like, to Sid to keep away from Barbara. That was temptation to Sid. That was the chase was intensified. The greater the odds, the greater Sid had to win. He went all out for Barbara.
The man got older. That was probably part of the reason why it's stuff like camping. He was in his late 50s. Barbara Windsor was playing a 16-year-old schoolgirl. There was a bit of a bit of a difficulty about that. But then again, Sid gets away with it because Sid, as I say, is Sid. He can do that sort of thing. But come Cowan Dick in 1974, the man was 61. And to chase 25-year-old girls is a bit dubious.
Blimey.
Vic, what are you doing in here? Get out of here.
I'm sorry. If I'd known you were in here, I wouldn't have come, would I?
Yes, all right. Just get out of here quick before somebody comes in.
You haven't got any soap on that bit.
There are instances where Barbara would be talking to people, Sid would appear at her elbow. Bernard Bresslaw would help Barbara back onto the stage during a performance. As they went into the wings, exited to the wings, Sid would pounce and say, "What are you doing? Leave her alone, don't you ever touch her." There were arguments, there were near fights. At the end of the day, after several weeks, several months, they'd actually got together. They'd bought a flat just up the road in Pimlico. They were living together in essence, but it was becoming all too heavy for Barbara. Barbara said, or gave Sid the ultimatum that this has got to end. You're hurting me, I can't sleep, I can't live, we've got to separate. At that time, Sid told Barbara, just as she was going off to a tour in Australasia, that if Sid didn't have Barbara, he would be dead within 18 months. 17 months later, he died on stage. This is a man who had been warned that if he didn't cut his lifestyle, his career, he would die. He was back on the cigars, he was back on the drink. He knew what he was doing to his body, he knew what he was doing to his heart. He was getting through 2 or 3 bottles of whiskey a day, he was certainly getting through 10 cigars a day, he was overeating, he was doing everything wrong, and as far as Sid was concerned, that if he couldn't have Barbara, he wanted to die. And I'm convinced that he pushed himself right to the very edge, and he had another heart attack.
Sid James died of a heart attack on stage during a touring performance of the ironically titled The Mating Game at the Empire Theatre in Sunderland. He was 62. The Carry On films in which he had starred were now in decline. Kenneth Williams was living alone in his Euston flat. The loss of public adulation, the frustration of a career restricted by the Carry On films, and the pain of an unfulfilled private life had become intolerable.
He was virtually mentioning suicide from when he started them. It was a trait throughout his life. He would get very, very depressed. And the more the public loved him, it seemed, the more depressed he would get.
It's a debasing experience. I mean, I hear that Kenneth Williams loathed playing that part. And he was a terribly good actor. The fact he didn't get better parts, well, you know, that's unfortunate.
Every other time he was offered a Carry On film, it was, this is going to be my last one. I really can't go through the motions on this again. It's driving me mad.
In the last, 18 months of his life, I think he was in severe pain from different sources. He had back trouble, he had ulcers quite badly, which the doctors seemed unable to remove. And this sort of disoriented him, I think. It actually began to unhinge him, loosen his grip on reality as a whole. He uses this term, I haven't seen it elsewhere, I am a suicidalist. And a few months before he actually did die, he had a kind of dry run, you know. He had this bunch of pills that he didn't use for medicinal purposes. He called those his poison. They were strong barbiturates. He took a couple of these and then got, as he said, cold feet. He didn't go any further. But that was a rehearsal for the real thing, which duly came.
Kenneth Williams died from an overdose in 1988. The coroner returned an open verdict, but it was more than obvious that Williams had committed suicide. He had starred in 26 of the 31 Carry On films. With Sid James and Kenneth Williams dead, the tabloid press turned their attention to Charles Hawtrey as he lived out his last lonely days drunk in Deal. The reclusive Hawtrey gained unwanted media attention after a fire at his home in 1984.
Apparently he was in the bedroom with a young man doing what you do, and I don't know what happened, but the house caught fire. Obviously fire engines were called, there was a big fuss, and he was dragged naked from the bedroom with this young man. And I think it badly affected his esteem, because although he'd never hidden the fact that he was homosexual, he didn't want particularly to advertise the fact outside his immediate circle. Towards the end of his life, Charles Hawtrey got very ill indeed, and he was told that, I think he got gangrene in the legs, and he was told that he got to have both his legs cut off or die, basically. And according to good old Barbara Windsor, he said, no, I want to die with my boots on.
It was inevitable that the years of alcohol abuse would take its toll on Hawtrey's fragile health.
He phoned me from the hospital bed the night before he died, and apparently he had blood clots in his veins or something. And he said, I've just been reading a book, dear boy, and I think I can get my veins taken out and put in with pig's veins. I'm going to have a word with the surgeon tomorrow. But the following day he was dead.
The reclusive comic actor who made millions laugh died alone, ignored by show business friends and colleagues. Scheduled to star in what was to become the last Carry On film, Carry On Columbus, Frankie Howerd passed away the week before filming. His death brought the true Carry On tradition to a close.
On a lighter note about Frankie's death, I think Frankie would have liked this too, that he and Benny Hill, another great comic, died on the same day, Easter Sunday, 1992. And they both had heart problems. And in fact, when Benny found Frankie had gone to hospital, he sent him a note saying, stop trying to steal my act, I do the heart jokes. I thought that was rather nice.
The main Carry On stars are long dead, but their legacy continues. Television reruns have brought the film's saucy seaside humour to new audiences. 40 years on from the first Carry On film, what will be their lasting appeal?
Carry-on movies are rather like British wine. Anemic, overrated, and do not travel well.
We tend to be failures, and there is something gloriously seedy and wonderfully ridiculous about the Carry-On team. They're not failures as such because they're kind of too good-spirited to be sad or to be bitter. But, you know, for all their schemes and for all their, you know, whether their scheme is merely to get a lusty weekend with the right bird, or whether it's something grander to make money or to save a hospital or whatever plotline it is, when it fails, or if it ends in a bun fight, it sort of doesn't matter.
Although we pretend to be politically correct these days, there is still a large, proportion of us that laughs at the underdog and laughs at the person more unfortunate. We pretend not to. That's the thing about this kind of, the pretense of being politically correct, but actually just under the surface, spastic porn we're talking about, in a lot of these films. They love it, they lap it up.
And there are things in the Carry-On films still that have given people almost like cinema urban myths. Like when you go into hospital and they want to take your temperature with a rectal thermometer, the thought always goes through your mind, is it a rectal thermometer or is it going to be a daffodil?
Colonel, whatever's going on?
Come, matron. Surely you've seen a temperature taken like this before?
Yes, Colonel, many times. But never with a daffodil.
Never mind Orson Welles with Rosebud. The image I cherish is Wilfrid Hyde White with a daffodil up his jacksie.
This is fantasy. We're living in a fantasy world in England, and I think it's time we woke up and really looked films and situations like Carry-On films right in the eye and said, this is crap, let's dump it, we can do better things. This isn't British heritage, it's not Stonehenge, it's crap. Why don't we stand up and say it's crap and then forget it?
If you don't agree with that, you'll love what's next here on 4. Hattie Jakes does the rounds in the classic Carry-On Matron.